Hi, and welcome to today's discussion. What we will be talking about is how do project managers manage project budgets. I'll be covering actually, in brief, what a project budget is, how you develop the project budget, ongoing monitoring, managing expenses all the way throughout the project, and then also controlling how the projects you control the project costs throughout the whole project life cycle. And then we'll cover a little bit about forecasting on how you forecast future spend to try and manage your project. So let's crack on. So as I said, we will be talking about how do project managers manage their project budget. So without the first topic again is I really want to give you a brief explanation about how what is a project budget. Ultimately, without understanding what a project budget is, you're kind of going to be struggling. And the key element is what a project budget is a defined cost baseline that your project will incur. So these are costs you will incur to allow for you to successfully deliver your project. These are things such as expenses, resource costs, supply costs, equipment, hardware, all those things that encompass project for your project to be successful. So your first stage really is to develop the project budget and really understand what needs to go into your project budget. Now, in essence, you need to put every single item that you're going to have to purchase or use resource. So like I said earlier, what resource will be using for the project. You need to expense that because none of that's free. It's going to cost the business money. You need to then also look at um, your suppliers, any kind of equipment you need, hardware, the third-party services. All those things need to be defined as part of your project. So when you develop the project budget, you need to collate all that information initially. Um, Again, some things you will be quite easily be able to define your cost budget, but some of the things you need to do for what I've done in previous projects where you are actually scoping the work out before you actually kick off the project is understand the key activities. Those key activities then allow you to build the cost budget or the project budget. I've used project MS Project. Microsoft Project gives you the ability to outline all the detail step by step, and then you can start assigning individuals a cost-based resource. You can start putting all the activities in if you're having a third-party engagement. Sometimes that doesn't give you everything, so supplier costs. So if you are, let's say, for example, if you're doing an IT project, you need to get Microsoft or Cisco or other third parties, Aruba, whoever they may be, to do the work. You're going to have to get estimated costs from them. Those all need to go into your project, but your budget. So cost estimation, it's when you start the project, it is an estimation because it won't be 100% accurate. What it will be is a close enough reflection of what your cost will be. Cost budgeting as well. So once you've collated all this information, you develop the project budget, say, okay, from all the information we have at this point in time, this is what we perceive as the cost, which your stakeholders, you need to make sure you've highlighted. So once you've developed that, you then need to take it to the next stage. And you then need to define a clear strategy of how you're going to manage those costs, but we'll cover that in a little bit later. But again, once you've got that defined project, you then need to make sure that you engage with your team, your stakeholders, etc., to start reflecting on other costs, etc. Now, this is where the challenge is really interesting, where you start speaking to your stakeholders. Some stakeholders who are the people who sign off on your project will say, "Oh, the costs are too high," or "The cost, why am I spending this?" Why? You need to be prepared for those answers. Just as you would, like in real life, go to buy a car or budget or a house or whatever, you're going to challenge every expense that you're going to incur. Exactly the same thing. Whoever's in charge of your project or your key stakeholder who's an advocate for your project will challenge you on those costs. And at the end of that, we would hope through due process, you will be able to then negotiate that this is the project. Now, in many organizations, you have to go through finance to get all that done, but that depends on which organization and what that process is. So once you've now got all the information for your project budget and you've got it agreed, your next stage is to maintain and monitor project expenses. So monitoring project expenses is a big one. You really need to make sure that you are keeping on top of your expenses. Really, if you don't monitor your expenses, how do you know if you're within budget? Have you overspent on a certain area? Have your costs gone up, etc. All those things need to be managed. So I know you might have a project budget of 100,000 for technical resource who builds desktop machines, or in a manufacturing plant you have a budget of x thousand pounds for bolts and nuts, etc. And you need to manage that and cost that into your build or your delivery of your project. So all those need to be managed. Now, methods of managing your expenses, you can put it in MS Project, simply put it in an Excel spreadsheet. Again, work closely with finance. If depending on which organization, how big the project is, you need to work closely with finance, because there are things that they want to balance your project in different ways for different costs, and you need to sit down and liaise with your finance team to understand how best to do that. Now, there's multiple approaches which I can cover in a different video about how you manage and negotiate with finance, etc., such as OPEX, operational expenditure, etc., and so forth. But again, monitoring your project throughout, not simply monitoring that people are doing stuff, but monitoring those expenses. How much? So, if an engineer says it's going to take me 5 days, did it take 5 days? Does it fit with your plan? If a piece of kit comes in, and you budgeted £10,000, but prices have gone up, it's suddenly now £12,000. You then need to reflect that in your project costs. Now, change management is a key element as project expenses, because sometimes if a project gets delayed, you need more money. So monitoring comes into itself. You suddenly realize, oh, okay, I'm running out of money, but I'm right at the end of my project. You need to engage with your stakeholders, and you use change control to make sure that you've either requested more money, and if you are fortunate, and I have seen in many cases, you change control to reduce the cost because things you've either delivered them sooner or etc. And it's very rare that that's happened, but I have seen it in some occasions where it does. But change management is a big key part of monitoring project expenses. Change management in itself is a big project, is a discussion in itself, and is a key part within your project all throughout. So monitoring your expenses is very, very important throughout the project. Next one really is, how do you control your project costs? Now, certain things are set in stone, how much resource you have, for example. Okay, as part of the project, they've agreed 100 days of resource A, another 50 days of resource B, 60 days of resource C. Those things you can manage, as you can track that as people in many organizations fill in timesheets, which then reflect on your financial system, which then you can then monitor. And if you don't have a financial system that does that for you, then you have to manually agree with people saying, okay, well, I've got a T&M, time and materials cost for this. How much time have you spent? And with suppliers, if it's materials, how much material cost, and you keep that tracking and simple. Keep it simple. Doesn't have to be overly complicated. Excel is the best format I found to manage those things, to make sure that you're always controlling your project costs. Again, sometimes just letting people do things nilly-willy and just letting them get on with it will lead to, if you're not on top of it, that you're overspending very, very quickly, and before you know it, that you're unable to complete your project. And if you're unable to complete your project, then you have a difficult conversation with your senior stakeholders saying, sorry, I didn't control this, or this, I missed this, or whatever. And those are conversations your stakeholders don't want to hear. They want to hear that you've been on top of your expenses and you'll be able to see either overspend, etc., beforehand. So controlling your project costs throughout the project will give you a clear indication. A guideline I do it on a weekly basis in most of my projects, where I can do it. Some projects you will find that they don't have a budget. They just say, no, it's fine, it's internal, get it all done. And some projects where you sell to third parties and you are a supplier and you are selling a product or a service, those are more strictly controlled, etc. So that those things is where it really matters. Again, Cost benefit analysis, you can do that just to understand. That's the process where you can understand, what benefit are you going to get out of this. Now, there's two ways. If it adds no value to the project, you de-scope it. Adds value to your project, you bring it in, and you do change control to uplift the project for cost, or you take some, whatever. Or you also need to do change control for anything you change as well throughout your project. So really controlling your project cost, I would say, is the minimum you must be doing, is monitoring your project on a weekly basis, just to understand where you are, how much effort, how much time, how much resource, how much material, etc. is being used. And if it becomes a habit that you do it every week, it becomes a lot easier than trying to do it every 3-4 weeks where you've already forgotten what's happened. It's really key just to keep on top of it. And in some projects which I've done it on a daily basis, which means, because there's so many complicated work streams, it's just easier to do it daily. 15-20 minutes at the end of the day, you put that into your activity and you control it that way. Okay, so moving on to the next bit, really, is forecasting project costs. And this is really, for anybody who's never done this before, forecasting is really trying to predict what your future costs might be. Now, those are things that, you don't have a crystal ball. It's very, very difficult, but future costs you can probably manage an estimation, and as you keep controlling your project, you will probably start realizing very quickly how, actually, resource A takes slightly longer than resource B. My costs have gone up on materials, etc. So you can start anticipating increase, decrease, or etc. in costs, and then you can start creating your own models to say, okay, well, let me see if this happens, what if that happens, etc. And then you build that into some sort of forecast. MS Project does let you do that. You can forecast, saying, okay, well, this is where I've been, what I've done, what you've completed, how much budget cost you've got, etc. Excel spreadsheet, you can do that as well. If your company that you work for has an internal system, financial system, etc., that will give you the ability to forecast as well. But again, keep on top of it. That's my key advice on this one. So again, there's multiple techniques you can use to forecast, and I'm not going to cover in detail, but what I will cover is to give you a brief, just a quick highlight. So there's trend analysis. Are you seeing any kind of trends, that you can see that could easily impact you in the future, i.e., supply lead times, the resource trends in the team? Like I said earlier, are one group more efficient than another, etc., that you can plan for. And looking for cost variances within your project. If you have multiple suppliers, does it mean that just because you defined an X supplier for your project, does it mean that you cannot go to somebody else to reduce your cost, etc.? So things like that are things you should be looking for. And again, with forecasting, but the only way you're going to be able to forecast is if you're regularly updating your project budget and communicating the budget forecast to your team members and your stakeholder. And anybody who's senior stakeholders who have a key interest in your project, or are the advocates, or are the sponsors of your project, you need to be engaging with them regular to explain where you are with your budget and if you're within your budget. If you're a customer-facing project manager where you are selling product, you need to make sure your customer is fully aware of any delays they are causing, costs that you're incurring on their behalf, all those things. Unfortunately, they're not easy conversations, but you need to be having those with your customer. But the thing is, the more open you are, the more honest you are about your costing, the easier the discussions are when things go wrong, and you have to have that difficult conversation. Okay, guys, that concludes everything for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for your time.